When a self-righteous HOA Karen tried to control my land, she didn't just call the cops, she tried to ruin my life. Her mistake? She forgot who actually owned the lake that gave her neighborhood its value. So I made one purchase that turned her world upside down forever. I never imagined that my peaceful ranch, nestled at the edge of a sparkling lake in rural Texas, would become the stage for one of the most infuriating battles of my life. The lake wasn't just a piece of water, it was a part of my family's heritage, a landmark that carried the weight of generations. My grandfather had bought this land back in the 1940s, long before suburban sprawl crept into the countryside. Back then, it was just open fields, winding creeks, and acres upon acres of untouched wilderness. Over time, my family built a modest ranch house, planted pecan trees, raised cattle, and tended horses. The lake, fed by a natural spring, had always been ours. When my grandfather passed, the property was divided, and by luck and determination, I managed to keep the main homestead with the lake entirely under my name. For decades, it was our sanctuary, a place for fishing, swimming, and watching sunsets that painted the water gold. But then came the HOA. About 20 years ago, a developer bought up the land across from my ranch and began turning it into a cookie-cutter subdivision. At first, I didn't care. People have to live somewhere, and the world doesn't stay frozen in time. But the developer made a crucial decision that would eventually tie my ranch to theirs. They marketed the subdivision as Lakeview Estates, selling the dream of lakefront living to families who wanted that suburban paradise feel. There was just one problem. The lake wasn't theirs. It was mine. Their houses were near it, sure, but every drop of that water was legally on my property. Still, real estate brochures conveniently blurred the truth, saying things like community lake access or adjacent to private lake, which buyers interpreted however they wanted. Over the years, residents started acting like the lake was a shared community feature, walking down to fish, bringing their kids to swim, even setting up lawn chairs on my shoreline. At first, I was lenient. I knew most of these families weren't trying to trespass out of malice. They had simply been misled. I'd wave at the kids, nod at the dads fishing, and even stop for neighborly chats now and then. But every leniency gets tested, and soon enough, the HOA president, who would later become the thorn in my side, decided to formalize their supposed rights. Her name was Barbara, though everyone in the neighborhood called her Karen behind her back, and not without reason. She was the quintessential stereotype: bossy, entitled, forever clutching a clipboard as if it were a weapon. She had a permanent scowl carved into her face and an endless supply of rules, memos, and fines for her poor neighbors. But her biggest obsession was the lake. She treated it like her crown jewel, hosting HOA meetings about how to preserve its beauty, collecting money for non-existent maintenance funds, and even sending newsletters calling it our community's lake. The audacity would have been laughable if it weren't so infuriating. I tolerated it for a while, thinking it was just talk, but the day came when I finally had to draw the line. It happened one Saturday morning when I was putting up a for sale sign, not for the whole ranch, but for a small portion of the land near the far edge of the lake. I had decided to sell off about 10 acres I didn't really use, and the money would help me expand my cattle operation. It wasn't a big deal, at least not to me. But apparently, it was a big deal to Karen. The second she saw that sign hammered into the ground, she came marching over in her sun hat, oversized sunglasses, and judgmental glare. "You can't do that," she snapped, her voice shrill as if she were speaking to a child. I looked at her, genuinely confused. "Can't do what?" "Sell the lake," she said, folding her arms. "This is community property. You can't just put it on the market like you own it." That was the moment I realized just how delusional she was. I tried to keep calm, explaining that not only was the land mine, but the lake itself was wholly within my property line. I even offered to show her the deed, the survey maps, everything. But she wasn't interested in facts. She was interested in control. She sneered, told me I was mistaken, and stomped off. I thought that would be the end of it. Just another ridiculous HOA tantrum. I was wrong. The next afternoon, as I was fixing a fence post near the stables, 2 sheriff's deputies pulled up my gravel driveway. My stomach sank immediately because I knew who had called them. Sure enough, as they got out of the cruiser, I saw Karen's SUV parked not far behind. She was standing there with her arms crossed, smirking like she had already won. The deputies approached me, their hands resting casually near their holsters. "Sir, we got a call about some dispute over property. The HOA here says you're trying to sell land that doesn't belong to you." I wiped the sweat from my brow, biting back my frustration. "Deputies, this is my ranch. I have the title, I have the deed, and I have every right to sell whatever portion of it I choose. That woman—" I gestured toward Karen, who was eavesdropping with a smug grin, "does not own an inch of this property." Karen immediately cut in. "Don't listen to him. The lake is part of our community covenant. He's trying to scam people. We need to stop him before someone gets hurt." One of the deputies sighed, clearly recognizing the type of nonsense they'd walked into. "Ma'am," he said patiently, "unless you have paperwork proving this land belongs to your HOA, there's nothing we can do here." Karen bristled. "It's implied in our contracts." She barked. "Why else would people buy homes here? Because they were fooled by your developer's wording," I muttered under my breath. Then louder, "Look, officers, if you'd like to come inside, I'll show you the survey documents. It'll clear this up in 5 minutes." They nodded, and I brought them into the ranch house, spreading the paperwork out on the dining table. The deputies looked everything over and agreed. Without a doubt, the lake and the land around it were entirely mine. They thanked me for my time and left, but not before giving Karen a sharp warning about filing frivolous complaints. She looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. But here's the thing about people like her. They don't back down when they're wrong. They double down. That evening, I received an email from the HOA itself, signed by Karen, accusing me of illegally tampering with community property, and demanding that I cease all attempts to sell our lake. They even threatened to fine me if I didn't comply. It would have been laughable if it wasn't such blatant harassment. I knew then that this wasn't just going to fizzle out. It was the beginning of a war. At first, I tried to fight fire with water, so to speak. I drafted a polite but firm letter, attaching copies of my deed survey and even the county's property tax records, all of which listed me as the sole owner. I delivered the letter personally to the HOA's next meeting, where Karen practically exploded in front of her neighbors, accusing me of forging documents and bullying the community. To my surprise, not everyone sided with her. Some homeowners looked shocked, realizing for the first time that the lake they thought was theirs actually wasn't. A few even apologized to me privately afterward, admitting they'd been misled when they bought their houses. But Karen wasn't just going to roll over and admit she'd been wrong. If anything, she was more determined than ever to make my life miserable. Within weeks, I started noticing strange things. Someone left piles of trash near my driveway. My fences were mysteriously cut, letting cattle wander dangerously close to the road. And one morning, I woke up to find spray-painted graffiti on my barn door that read, "Community Lake, or not yours." I knew exactly who was behind it, but without proof, I couldn't call her out. Instead, I did what I've always done. Kept my head down, worked my land, and bided my time. But in the back of my mind, a plan was forming, a plan that would not only put Karen in her place, but ensure she could never mess with me again. At the time, though, all I felt was simmering frustration. My ranch had always been my sanctuary, and now it felt like I was under siege. Every time I saw Karen driving by, glaring at me through her tinted windows, I felt that knot in my chest tighten. But I also knew something she didn't. Money talks louder than HOA rules, and I had both the patience and the resources to outplay her at her own game. The weeks that followed were some of the most exhausting of my life, not because I was physically tired, but because the constant tension with Karen and her HOA gnawed at me like a parasite. Every day seemed to bring a new stunt. I'd see strange cars parked at the end of my drive late at night, hear rumors from neighbors about legal action the HOA was supposedly preparing against me, and even catch kids sneaking into my property to swim in the lake. When I confronted them, they claimed that Mrs. Karen said it was fine. That infuriated me more than anything. It was one thing for her to harass me directly, but dragging children into her lies? That was low, even for her. Still, I forced myself to stay calm. Rage might feel good in the moment, but it doesn't win wars. Strategy does. What Karen underestimated was that I wasn't some isolated rancher with no resources. Over the years, I had built up my savings, diversified my income, and worked closely with local real estate brokers whenever I wanted to lease grazing rights or consider development. I knew the land game better than she did, and I also knew how to play the long one. After that HOA email accusing me of tampering with community property, I decided it was time to consult a lawyer. I drove into town and met with a man named David Hernandez, a sharp attorney who had handled land disputes for decades. I brought every deed, survey, and tax record with me, and after reviewing them, he looked up with a dry smile. "Well," he said, tapping the stack of papers, "this is one of the cleanest chains of title I've seen in a while. Karen and her HOA don't have a legal leg to stand on." "Tell that to the sheriff's deputies who keep getting called to my place," I grumbled. He chuckled. "Trust me, if she keeps filing false reports, it's going to backfire on her. But if you want to shut this down permanently, there's a better option." I leaned forward. "I'm listening." David explained that HOAs rely on collective belief and perception. If the homeowners think the lake is theirs, they'll act like it is, regardless of what the paperwork says. But if I wanted to crush that illusion, I needed to assert control in a way no one could ignore. He suggested putting up a fence around the lake's perimeter, posting no trespassing signs, and even installing cameras. That would have worked on paper, but I knew it would spark all-out war in reality. These families had gotten used to thinking of the lake as theirs. Cutting them off overnight would make me public enemy number one. No, I needed something more subtle. Something that not only reinforced my ownership, but also turned the tables entirely on Karen. As fate would have it, the perfect opportunity presented itself just a month later. A for sale sign went up on one of the lots in Lakeview Estates. I happened to notice it while driving past, and curiosity made me call the realtor. To my shock, the property belonged to none other than Karen herself. I later learned that she was behind on her mortgage, thanks to some messy personal finances she kept hidden from the HOA. The irony was almost too delicious to believe. The woman who was harassing me over property rights was quietly trying to cash out of the very community she lorded over. I kept the information to myself at first, not wanting her to catch wind of my interest. But I immediately saw the opening. If I could purchase her lot, I would have direct control over her access to the lake. Her property line was one of only two that connected the subdivision directly to the shoreline. If I owned it, not only could I shut her out, but I could also block the entire neighborhood's easiest path to the water. It was the perfect revenge, but it would require careful maneuvering. Before making any moves, I did some reconnaissance. I attended an open house for the property, posing as just another curious buyer. Walking through Karen's home was surreal. It was immaculate to the point of suffocation. Plastic covers on the furniture, inspirational signs plastered across every wall, and a fridge stocked with nothing but low-fat yogurt and sparkling water. The backyard, however, was the real prize. From her deck, you could see a clear path down to the water, one she had treated as her personal gateway to the lake. I pretended to admire the view while secretly imagining the look on her face when she realized it no longer belonged to her. That night, I called David. "I want the lot," I told him. He didn't even hesitate. "Then let's get it." We moved fast, submitting a cash offer that was just under asking price but strong enough to stand out. I knew Karen would hate the idea of me buying her property, so we used an LLC as the buyer's name to keep her from realizing who was behind the purchase. Within 3 weeks, the deal was done. I owned Karen's lot. When the news broke, chaos rippled through the neighborhood. Karen tried to save face, claiming she had chosen to move for personal reasons, but whispers quickly spread that she had been forced out due to financial troubles. What really sent shockwaves, though, was when I put up a new fence around the backyard and installed a locked gate across the path leading to the lake. Homeowners who were used to walking through Karen's lot to get to the water suddenly found themselves staring at a steel barrier with a "private property, no trespassing" sign bolted to it. Karen lost it. She stormed down my driveway one evening, red-faced and trembling with rage. "You snake!" she screamed. "You bought my house just to spite me!" I leaned against my truck, arms crossed, and gave her the calmest smile I could manage. "No, Karen. I bought your house because it was for sale. What I choose to do with my property is none of your business, same as my lake." Her voice cracked with fury. "You can't block community access. We'll sue you for this." Go ahead, I said evenly. But I think you'll find that the court system is a little less forgiving than your HOA newsletter. She sputtered, unable to form a comeback before storming off into the night. Watching her retreat, I felt a rush of satisfaction unlike anything I'd ever experienced. For once, I wasn't on the defensive. I was in control, and Karen knew it. But of course, she wasn't going to go quietly. Over the next month, the HOA waged a campaign of intimidation. They sent letters to every homeowner warning that I was a hostile land baron who wanted to destroy their property values. They circulated petitions demanding that the county eminent domain my land for community use. Something so absurd, it made the county clerk laugh out loud when I asked him about it. Karen even tried to rally neighbors to protest at the edge of the lake, waving homemade signs that read, "Save our lake and stop the greed." It would have been comical if it weren't so disruptive. What she didn't realize was that her antics were backfiring. More and more neighbors began quietly approaching me, apologizing for her behavior and admitting they didn't support her crusade. Some even asked if I'd be willing to sell them private memberships for lake access. The irony was sweet. The very thing Karen had fought against, my control, was becoming the only way her neighbors could enjoy the water. By the end of the summer, the HOA was fractured. Half the residents wanted to keep fighting me, but the other half wanted to make peace. And in the middle of it all, Karen was unraveling. She had lost her home, her reputation, and her grip on the community. Yet she still clung to the fantasy that she could somehow beat me. The final straw came when she called the cops one last time, claiming I had illegally blocked a public easement. The deputies arrived, checked the records, and promptly told her that no such easement existed. One of them even pulled me aside and muttered, "She's wasting everyone's time at this point." Watching her argue with law enforcement, red-faced and desperate, I realized she had become a parody of herself. That night, I stood on the dock of my lake, looking out over the moonlit water. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace settling back over me. But I also knew this wasn't the end. Karen was beaten, but she wasn't gone. And if there's one thing I've learned about people like her, it's that they don't disappear quietly. They come back louder, angrier, and more desperate. What she didn't know, and what I was already planning, was that I had one more move up my sleeve. A move that would not only end this battle once and for all, but ensure that Karen and her HOA never had power over me again. The morning after Karen's last police stunt, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, staring at the deed to her former property. The paper was crisp and official, stamped with the county seal, a symbol that I held all the cards now. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my peace. Karen had turned my quiet sanctuary into a battlefield, and I wasn't going to settle for a truce. I needed to end this in such a way that she and her HOA would never come crawling back with their entitled demands again. My lawyer David called later that day, his tone light with amusement. Word on the street is Karen's throwing tantrums at HOA meetings. Apparently some neighbors are blaming her for losing their lake access. I chuckled. Good. Maybe they'll finally see through her. They already are, he said. But if you want to make sure this never resurfaces, I've got an idea. He explained that I could formally subdivide Karen's old lot, rerouting property boundaries, so that access to the lake was completely cut off from the rest of Lakeview Estates. Then, by filing the change with the county and erecting barriers, I could make it legally and physically impossible for anyone in the HOA to even claim a path to the water. The maneuver would cost some money in surveys and permits. But once it was done, there'd be no more gray area. The lake would be untouchable, mine alone. I didn't hesitate. Do it. Over the next 6 weeks, crews came out to mark lines, install fencing, and pour concrete for a gated entrance. I hired a local construction company to build a sturdy privacy wall along the portion of the lake that faced the subdivision. When it was finished, the residents of Lakeview Estates could no longer see the water from their streets. What had once been their prized view was now a blank stretch of beige stone. From my side, the wall was low enough not to block sunsets or the serene horizon, but from their side, it might as well have been a fortress. The day the wall went up, I stood on my dock and watched a group of angry neighbors gather at the edge of their cul-de-sac. Karen was, of course, leading them, flailing her arms like a preacher at a revival, shouting that I was a tyrant and that their lake had been stolen. Some people nodded along, but others just shook their heads. A few even walked away, muttering that they were sick of the drama. That was when it truly hit me. She had lost her power. Not because of me, but because she had overplayed her hand so many times that even her own neighbors were done with her. The following week, I received a certified letter from the HOA. Inside was a final warning, accusing me of damaging their property values and threatening to take me to civil court. I brought the letter straight to David, who laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. "This isn't even a lawsuit," he said, waving the paper. "It's just a strongly worded tantrum. If they try to sue, we'll crush them with the deed records." Sure enough, nothing ever came of it. Their bluff had been called, and they had nothing left. But Karen wasn't ready to slink away. She started posting online, writing long, unhinged rants in community forums about how I had stolen the lake. She even tried to contact local news outlets, hoping someone would take her side. None did. One reporter actually called me for comment, and when I explained the situation and showed the paperwork, he laughed and said, "Sounds like she's just mad she lost." The article he published painted her as the classic meddling HOA villain, and after that, her reputation tanked even further. Meanwhile, I embraced my new role as the undisputed owner of the lake. I invested in a proper dock, bought a small pontoon boat, and started hosting quiet fishing retreats for veterans and old friends from town. Word spread quickly, and soon people were offering to pay for private access. At first I hesitated, but then I realized, why not? If these families wanted to enjoy the lake, they could do it on my terms, through memberships that helped fund its upkeep. Within months, I had a list of paying members from outside the subdivision, each grateful for the opportunity. Not one of them complained about the rules, because they understood it was a privilege, not a right. The irony was rich. While the families of Lakeview Estates glared at the wall, unable to even glimpse the water, outsiders were happily enjoying it under my hospitality. I wasn't being cruel, I was being fair. And fairness, I realized, is something Karen had never understood. She thought rules existed to control others. I knew rules existed to protect what's yours. One evening, just as the sun dipped low and painted the water in molten gold, Karen made one last attempt. I saw her SUV pull up near the new gate, and out she came, wearing her usual oversized sunglasses and a face twisted in determination. She marched up to the barrier and rattled it with both hands, shouting my name. I walked down slowly, calm as ever, and leaned against the gate. "What do you want, Karen?" I asked, my voice steady. "You can't do this," she hissed. "You can't keep us from the lake. It belongs to the community. You're destroying our neighborhood." I studied her for a long moment, then shook my head. "You had every chance to be a good neighbor. You could have respected my property, accepted the truth, and moved on. Instead, you lied, harassed me, and tried to turn everyone against me. Now look around. Your neighbors don't even trust you anymore. And as for this lake, it never belonged to you. Not 1 inch of it." Her face contorted, and for the first time, I saw something besides anger in her eyes. I saw defeat. She turned without another word, stomped back to her car, and drove away. That was the last time she ever came near my property. Over the next year, the subdivision changed. The HOA grew weaker as more homeowners stopped paying dues, tired of Karen's endless battles. Eventually, I heard she stepped down as president, moving out of the neighborhood entirely. Some said she relocated to another state to live with her sister. Others whispered that she'd gone bankrupt. Whatever the truth was, it didn't matter to me. She was gone, and with her, the chaos vanished. Life on the ranch returned to its old rhythm: quiet mornings feeding cattle, long afternoons fixing fences, and evenings spent on the water. The lake, once the source of constant strife, had become peaceful again. Sometimes, as I sat on the dock with a fishing line in the water, I'd think back on the whole ordeal and marvel at how far it had gone. All because one woman couldn't stand the idea that something wasn't hers to control. But here's the real kicker. Buying her lot wasn't just about revenge, it was about legacy. By securing that land, I ensured that my family's ranch and the lake that had always been part of it would remain untouched for generations. No HOA, no developer, no entitled neighbor would ever be able to take it away. That knowledge gave me more peace than any wall or gate ever could. In the end, Karen taught me something valuable without even meaning to. Sometimes the best way to protect what's yours isn't to fight fire with fire, but to outthink, outmaneuver, and outlast. She had noise, she had drama, she had bluster. I had patience, paperwork, and persistence. And in the end, that made all the difference. As the sun set one last time on a year of chaos, I sat on the deck of my boat, the lake shimmering all around me, and I raised a quiet toast to my grandfather. "We kept it, old man," I whispered. "They'll never take it from us." The water rippled gently in response, carrying the promise of peace into the night. And that's how one rancher turned the tables on an HOA Karen who thought she could claim what wasn't hers. By buying her lot and cutting off access, he didn't just win a petty fight. He secured his family's legacy forever. Thanks for watching Hidden Compass Stories, where truth always finds its way home.